Hey, good morning. All right, one question for you. You got to answer. Everybody's got to play along. Patriots or Eagles? The Eagles it is. Yeah. Hey, okay, here's the real question. If you're a regular Paradox, did you notice anything different this morning yet? To open a guitar. Okay, that's one. If you haven't noticed, all throughout this building and outside the building, the teens of Paradox are helping us pull off Sunday morning and creating experience for you to meet with God. So, here's the thing. I know it's cold out there. I know it's Super Bowl Sunday, and we've all got parties we're either going to or we're hosting, and you're going to have a moment where you're like, oh, I didn't get enough wings. Do I have time to get? All that's going on. Here's what I want you to do. Lean in today and bring all the energy that you have for this morning. One, because I think God's got something he wants to say to you. But also because our teens all around this building are putting themselves out and into, in a lot of ways, some uncomfortable places. And it's fitting that today we're going to talk about, as we wrap up the series we've been in, what it looks like to embrace courage as we follow God towards the future he has for us. Because it takes courage to step into some of these roles, to sit in the positions of the camera back there where you're in charge of how that gets aimed, to be up here on the stage. Y'all are intimidating. I say this every week. Some of you are intimidating, and then the lights are on you, so we can't even see you. You're just like a silhouette thing. So, be friendly, be warm, be engaging. Here's what I want, is I want us to realize that we don't do this simply because, well, they're the church of tomorrow. They're the church of today. And one of the things that we have as a responsibility as leaders in the church is not just to create experiences for ourselves that we all walk away from impacted by, but to realize that we have to pass on the baton. And that one day, these are the men and women who will lead behind us. And so instead of waiting until that day, we want to be the leadership that is smart enough and passionate enough to have them lead with us and beside us. Today is one of those days. So, I'm asking you to bring all the energy you have throughout this whole morning, that they would know that they are valued and that they are appreciated and that the experience that they are working to create is working for you this morning. So welcome. So I'm going to say the kid in the red shirt is a good-looking kid. Must come from good genes. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Hey, what? It's all right. He was, of course, the kid that shouted, "Shut up." I'm like, oh. Hey, would you just do me a favor? I would love, where are they at? Are y'all in here? We're everybody. So some of them are still on our cameras this morning. Some of you that were on the stage, you're back here, right? I can't see you. You are back here. Hey, can we just thank them, all of them that are in here one more time for what they're doing? It's, I'm excited for you. You know, I get to know what's coming because we did this already. So I'm excited for you to experience the end this morning because they're going to be back up here and they're going to bring an energy at the end that's just going to be awesome. But one of the things I want to point out real quick, it's so cool. I was back there and James, one of our guys, our musicians, who's usually on the stage, but this week he's in the back watching. He just pulled me aside and he said, look at all the people around the room right now with their hands up. He said, our students are helping create that and pull them into that place of worship to God this morning. How cool is that? I hope all of you realize, you're all over, so this is going to be weird. I'm going to try and talk to all of you. I hope you guys realize God has made you all, whether you're on a camera or whether you were standing at the door or on our videos or on our stage, God has made you incredibly talented individuals and people. But listen to me, listen, hold on. You will have a choice throughout the course of your life to use that talent to glorify yourself or Him. I pray that you will continue to use what God has made you to do to bring glory to Him. We got enough people trying to glorify themselves in this world, but when you reflect the King of creation, nothing is sweeter in that place than using what He's made you to do to shine back at who He is. So I'm just proud of y'all. So proud of you guys. Thankful for you. So I'm going to ask that you do me a favor as well. I asked you to bring some energy to them. I'm going to ask you to bring it to me as well this morning because I practically preached myself hoarse during the first service. So I went and I hid in the back room in between, and I'm trying to find honey and Lifesaver mints, and I'm just trying to soothe my throat because I am really excited about this morning. And here's what's always hard, and sometimes it happens, is where I come in on a morning and I'm like, ah, and you guys still haven't got out of your sleepy face yet, and you're just like, So Here's what works great on a Sunday morning is when this book is resonating with the guy on the stage, and then it resonates with all of us. And I hope that you would all assume that anybody that does what I do, that there is a certain connection that they're having with the topic that they're teaching and how it's speaking to them. Like I would sure hope that you don't ever think that I step up here on the stage and it's just like, well, I'm just going to go through the motions and give you something. Like every week this is saying something to me, and I mentioned this last week, I'm just going to mention it again. This series is messing with me in a way that I'm not sure how to understand yet. Like, it's flipping my bowl of Cheerios upside down. It is stirring something in here, very powerful, and so much so that I keep feeling like the last couple weeks in particular, and today very much so, like I really want to be out there with you because I feel like there's something God is trying to get my attention on. And so in the midst of this morning, you're going to get this, but you're going to get some excitement for what I think God wants to say to you mixed in with some excitement of how I think he's trying to talk to me and me trying to figure all that out. So I said this last week, I'm going to say it again. I'm up here more as a student than a teacher. And I believe that most weeks. And this is just a very unique week that I feel like that is the case. So you ready to be students with me? We've been in the series for 4 weeks with one ultimate goal and aim, and it is to ask that God would do something supernatural to take our heart and his heart and put them into greater alignment with each other. That our hearts would be in greater alignment with what his heart cares about, with what his heart loves, and in alignment with what his heart is passionate about, with what his heart values, with his priorities, with his character, with the person of Jesus. That we would be people in that place that live with a tenacious commitment to leave little undone in this life that God put us on this rock to do. So that we would not be people that get to the end of our lives and have to face the frustration and maybe even the fear, the reality and the weight of missing so much of who we could have been or what we could have even done. And so we've been taking some talking points this series out of a book by the same name as our series. We actually took from the book the title, The Last Arrow. A guy named Erwin McManus wrote the book, and we've been taking a lot from his book and just the way that he handles the subject. So here's what I would just say to you. If this series has been speaking to you, and it's been a good series for you, then I would encourage you to pick the book up, if you haven't already, and keep it going. Like, don't let just the end of the series today be the end of it for you. Like keep that stirring for you. But today, as we do bring it to a close, I want to wrestle with one simple concept. So today, if you're looking even at your note page, there's no fill in the blanks, there's no big outline today, because I have one concept I want to wrestle with that I think just may be the defining thing that stands in the gap between whether or not we will actually become the people God made us to become, doing the things God made us to do. And we're not going to over-spiritualize it today. The one thing we're going to talk about today is whether or not we will find the ability to dig down deep and muster up the courage to step forward when God calls us to move. So I want to give you a verse, a couple of them actually at the start right now. That it's not going to be the main place that we're going to land this morning in terms of text, but it's going to be like the push, if you will, off the diving board and into the pool of the subject that's going to close this whole series out. So if you have a Bible, go to Joshua. Joshua's in the Old Testament. Once you go to the first, my throat's going to do weird things. I told you I about preached myself hoarse. So if I'm like talking and all of a sudden it sounds like I hit puberty, I don't know what's going on here, but it's getting weird. So verse 1 of chapter 1 says this: after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land that I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. And I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. And no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land that I swore to their forefathers to give them. So be strong and be very courageous. If you know anything of your history of the Bible, then you know that Moses is a really big deal. Like he is a part of the very beginning of the movement that ended up becoming Christianity, that is the reason that we're all sitting in this room, regardless of what you think of all of it yet. He's an enormous deal, and this is an enormous moment. because this is a moment where essentially his baton is being passed on. As God so clearly stated, Moses is dead. And so Joshua, who served at his side, is taking up his baton, and he's going to run in his place, taking on his responsibility. And it's interesting to me that as he does, is that God doesn't give him all kinds of instructions that we might think are necessary to end up achieving the kind of status that would lead us to be people that accomplish great things. Because this is, like, make no mistake, this is a quintessential big shoes to fill moment. Joshua knows it. He's well aware of it, which is why maybe God does say to him what he says. Over and over again, God says, here's what you need. Not go back to school and get a certificate or get a degree, get certified, or get a certain amount of people to say that this is what you should do and they're going to back you. He said, this is what you'll need. If you're going to step in to what I have for you, then the defining factor on whether or not you do it or won't may be one thing, Joshua: courage. Whether or not you will be strong and courageous. Over the course of that chapter, he will repeat that several times over to Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Sometimes we overcomplicate and over-spiritualize moving into the life God has for us, or opportunities that he throws in front of us, and whether or not we should do them or step towards them. Like we do things like, I want to read today in the Bible, and if God makes sure that he says it when I read my devotional today, and then on Wednesday, if I read the same kind of thing again, and then on Friday, if it's like, oh my gosh, that's the same type of verse, then God must be speaking and telling me, or no, I need somebody to come and tell me this is what you should do, and they've never met me before, and since they've never met me and they don't know me, God must be speaking. Like, we over-spiritualize it. Do you realize that sometimes the single greatest thing that will separate whether or not you fully step into who God has made you to be, and whether or not you will step out to do what God has made you to do, don't over-spiritualize it, is simply whether or not you will dig down deep and find the courage to step when he says step. Just to find the courage. And I think you and I will need that every bit as much as Joshua ended up needing it. And so here's what I've asked you to do for the course of this series. Every day I asked you to pray a simple prayer. Can we put it up? So we put this out and we put it in print. We asked you to pray this every day, just as a simple way to kind of echo this desire to God that he would align our hearts with his heart. So I want to give you a simple moment in your seat, kind of a private moment, you and God, to just offer these words up to him. Offer this prayer up to him. And here's what I want you to know about prayer. If this is a new thing for you, like, I don't even know if there's somebody to pray to. I'm not sure if there is a God. That's fine. You know what I love about Jesus is he doesn't need you to believe in him yet for him to believe that you exist. And so talk to him. Maybe this is one of the first times or the first time you ever have. There's no rules. There's no hoops you got to go through, no class you got to take. You just talk. And if there is a God, wouldn't you want that his heart would be your heart and his values to be your values, his purposes to be your purposes, his mind to be your mind. So this is your moment. So I'm going to give it to you, and then I'll pray for all of us in just a second. So talk to God. Father, please hear these words from us as your people. That God, you would somehow in a way only you can do. Would you do this that we've asked on the screen? Would you lead our hearts to care about the things that you do? And remove from our hearts the things that we are so often consumed with that just don't matter, that don't matter in the scheme of life, that don't matter in the context of eternity, that just don't matter to your heart because they don't matter. Teach us to be people that live for and care about the things that truly do matter. People that live to be rich, as we said weeks ago, rich towards you, not just rich towards the things of this world. Father, thank you that you are a good God who is always present to us. That your promise is that even if just a couple of us came, even if because of the snow in the Super Bowl only 2 of us showed up today, that you'd still be here every bit as much as you are now. And so in that truth and reality, I'm asking that would you take this stage over? Would you be more present up here than I am? Would you be more visible than I am? Would you be more discerning than I am? Would we hear you more than you hear me, and more than my voice is heard? God, would you be our pastor this morning? Pastor us, teach us, speak to us. Father, own this room and own us in a good way as only a loving Father with tender compassion can do. Man, God, I need your voice. I feel you trying to say things to me through this series, and I pray that you would give me an ear that would really hear, but more than just the ability to hear. God, for all of us, I think so many of us would say we want to hear. Would you help us truly have the courage to be responsive? We There's so many people that are content to just hear you and not actually walk with you, be obedient to you, to surrender their lives to you. Will we not be such people? But will we instead be people that know how to hear, that our ears are tuned to your voice, and then our lives walk in rhythm with yours? I pray. Inspire us this morning. Overwhelm us with your love this morning, and bring the words of this book that you gave to us alive. In Jesus' name, amen. So there's a part of me that debated when we were planning out this whole series whether or not to include this week, or if we should change the content up a little bit, because there's a slight possibility that a week like this could be a little bit of a bust your bubble type of week. In that, I've heard from a number of you throughout the last couple of weeks that it seems like this has been a really good series. And it's always interesting to me to see what series really resonate with us, because there's no planning meeting that we have where we're like, oh, this one's going to bomb, let's do it. We usually bring a series, we go, I think it'll be good. But then there's some that we just go, wow, it feels like that one's really stirring. And this one seems to be one of those where God just seems to be stirring. It's good, and we're enjoying, we're being challenged, we're being motivated. There's some things He's pressing into in our lives that we're not sure how to respond to, but it feels like it is a good series for us. And so today there might be kind of a potential for some of that to bust kind of in the, you know what I mean? When you get like information to someone previously, you're like, yay, and then you get new information, you're like, ugh, right? Like that could happen a little bit. I watched that happen recently with my kids. I have 3 of them. If you didn't pick it up yet, the one in the red shirt belongs to me, but he's in high school. But I've got 2 others. They're girls, and they're in elementary school. And my wife and I were driving recently. All my kids are in the back, and we're like listening into this conversation that they're having. I don't think you were in here when I told this story first service, so sorry, you're not gonna do well in this story. Just telling you now. So we're listening to him talk in the back, and my girls apparently are reading Old Yeller, the story, in school right now. And you got to understand, one of my daughters, she is the biggest animal lover I've ever met in my entire life, let alone in my family. She just loves animals. So she's telling the rest of the kids, she's telling her siblings, like, yeah, so we're reading, Old Yeller, and yeah, he just got bit by a snake, and it's really sad, but I'm sure he'll recover. And then, do you ever have those moments as a parent where you're watching your kid at a fork in the road, and you could see the wheels spinning, will I go good or evil? And you're like, oh, and sure enough, my son blots out, oh, he's gonna die. And you can just see it in Corinne's face, just like burst the bubble. And so here's how that could happen for some of us today. If you are sincerely wanting to walk with Jesus, like this isn't a Sunday morning thing, a check it off the box, I'm religious. No, like God came to us in the form of a body, and He's coming again, and you want to live your life after Him. You're trying to walk in step with Him. If that's your desire, you really want to walk in step with Him, and everything He has for you, you're going to walk towards that, all the future He's prepared you for. If that's really your desire, listen to me, it will be the most rewarding thing you'll ever do with your life, because it's what you're made for. Here's the bubble bust. I promise you it'll be the most difficult thing you'll ever do. There will be days that you may not want to do it. There will be days that you want to give up on it. There will be days it doesn't seem worth it. And there will be days it will be far easier to just chuck the whole thing. It will be the most difficult thing you'll ever do. Why would God say to Joshua, be strong and courageous, except for the fact that he's going to need courage? You don't tell someone to be courageous if they don't need courage, and you don't need courage unless the journey you're about to embark on is going to involve frustrations, disappointment, and all kinds of resistance. But that flies in direct conflict to many of the pervasive ideas in a lot of Christian circles today. For example, there's the one Christian circle that's referred to in a lot of different ways, like the health and wealth, or the prosperity gospel, or the name it and claim it. And unfortunately, a lot of the TV preachers, not all, but a lot of TV preachers seem to ascribe to this doctrine and this way of thinking. And it basically goes like this. God is there to make your life what you want it to be. Like He's kind of just like this supernatural, cosmic genie in the sky, and as long as you do what He says, give money when He says give money, act the way then you'll get whatever you want. You want that house, He'll give it to you. You want that spouse, He'll give it to you. You want the right amount of income, He'll give it to you. Oh, you're sick? Not anymore. He'll make you well, because you just got to do, and that's what God exists for. God exists to do whatever you want, to meet all your needs and to serve you. That's this idea. And then you might go, well, what about the opposite end of the spectrum? Well, I grew up on the opposite end. I grew up in a much more reformed circle. But even in the more reformed circle like what I grew up in, there's a very dangerous idea that still leads to a very similar end. And it's this idea that if you walk with God and you're in his will, then the center of God's will is, did anybody know this? The safest place to be. So in the circle I grew up in, there's a lot of idea that as long as I'm doing what God wants me to do, then life should work out. So the minute life doesn't work out, I get sick or I lost my job or whatever thing happens that I don't want to have happen, I must be out of God's will. I must have some sin somewhere and I got to get myself back in alignment with his will. And as long as I walk in his will, then everything will be fine. And so there's this idea in Christendom that a journey with Jesus will be a wealthy, healthy, safe journey. And I just don't think that's accurate. What do you say then to the countless men and women down through the ages who have suffered and struggled and lost and have given their lives, listen to me, some even to this very day right now as we sit comfy in padded seats that are giving their lives for their pursuit of Jesus? What do you say to all of them? Like, did they mess something up? Did they not read the right verses? Did they maybe not go far enough back in the Bible? They did. Oh, you just didn't believe enough. They didn't give enough so that it could be shaken together and returned back to them tenfold. Like, did they just mess something up? Or is it possible that while following Jesus will be the most rewarding thing you'll ever do with your life, listen to me, it will not be safe. It just won't be safe. So there's a story that's been speaking to me on this a lot lately, and it's a random, bizarre little story, and maybe the details won't grab you. I pray that they do, but they've been grabbing me and speaking to me on this, so I want to give them to you. It's found in a book called Mark. Mark is a collection of 4 different books in the Bible called the Gospels. If you're not familiar with the Gospels are the books that almost exclusively teach about Jesus. They are the books that contain the story of his life, his teachings, his miracles, his ministry, his time on earth. And in one of those books, there's a story of Jesus having an interaction that wasn't too dissimilar from many that he had had when he was with us. Mark chapter 3, verse 1 says this. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man, so real quick context, another time from a larger time of the context that this whole story falls into. Another time, just like every other time where Jesus tends to be teaching, and he finds people, and he goes to people, and he's drawn to people, but at the same time, there's this group of religious leaders around him, kind of the elite of his day, Pharisees and Sadducees and Sanhedrin, and they hate him because he's disrupting their whole way of life, and their whole world is getting flipped upside down because of him and what he's teaching. They're about law, and he's about grace, and they're about criticism, and he's about love, and so they can't stand him. So they're constantly looking for a reason to accuse him of any kind of crime. So there's this law that you can't do any work on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day for rest, and you can't do anything. And the amount of things that qualify as work is ridiculous. And so they're always looking for a reason to be able to go, ha! He's a lawbreaker, must not be God, can't be God because he broke the law. So when it says, and another time, this is what's always going on with the people around Jesus that are these people. And so here it is, another time. Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them, this is the religious leaders, were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Now, let's stop here for a minute. Here's what I love about that verse. That verse has the makings that create for some of us our deepest nightmares, isn't it? Like, stand up in front of the whole crowd of people, go! Because mind you, nothing's happened yet. It wasn't like he came up and healed him. We're going to get there. We're going to see what he does. But at this point, all he's done is just come up. Text says they watched him, so there must have been a conversation going on. And then all of a sudden, he looks at me and says, "Hey, stand up in front of everybody." But there's no healing or anything that seems to justify the reason for putting him on the spot in that moment. Like this is the kind of moment I think for many of us, like I said, this is what our nightmares are made of. Because I know some of you in here, you're people. There are some of you in here that you love attention, you love the spotlight, like you're outgoing, you're gregarious, you're friendly, you love to be the talkative person. If you're at a party, you're probably the center of the party. Like people don't even want to have a party if you're not at the party. Maybe in school, like for some of you, maybe you're like the popular kid, like you're running with the in crowd, or maybe you used to be, or if you're like there was an in crowd, that means you just weren't in it. Okay, so but like maybe you're that type of person. I just don't think that's the majority of us. In life, I don't think that's the majority of people. And so I think for most people, the average person, and probably most of us in this room, we'd be slightly horrified at a moment like this where Jesus just goes up to a guy and in the middle of the whole crowd goes, hey, I want you to stand up right now, and we're going to have all eyes on you. Like, I don't know if that'd be so bad. How about I come do it to you right now? Just pick you out. Literally, some of you just looked at the floor right now. See that? And that's what happens whenever I even call for volunteers. This is how I know this is us. I'm like, I need a volunteer. Like 90% of you do this. And you're like, I can read your thoughts. You're like, don't call on me, please don't call on me, please don't call on me. And some of you, I can even feel your aggression. You're like, I swear if he calls on me, I'm walking out of this building, right? Like, I feel it. I've even heard that there's some churches that if you're new, they make you stand up so everybody can applaud you and welcome you. Like, I get cold sweats thinking about that. If that was your first time at a church, would that be your last time? I mean, like, there's just so many, you don't have to raise your hand. That's just not how we're wired, so many of us. There's just this thing inside of us that doesn't want that kind of attention. And here's why I'm saying that. Not because that's a bad quality. Not because I'm trying to say, so the people that love the spotlight, they're going to get stuff done, where the rest of us just want to be in the shadows. No. Listen, I want you to give a humanness to this guy for a moment. Like, don't strip his humanity of him just because he's on paper and he lived 2,000 years ago. Because there's a really good chance that this guy was like us and he wanted nothing to do with being drawn out in front of a crowd and having all eyes on him. He didn't want to be stood up in front of everybody. I can assume that in part maybe because of his personality, that maybe he's like the majority, but here's where I get the biggest assumption from, is because of his handicap. In the culture that he lived in, if you were handicapped, you were completely ostracized. You were an outcast. You were an outcast from society, you were an outcast from family, you were an outcast from people. And it wasn't just an outcast with people. Your handicap was seen by most people, so his hand would have been seen by people as a literal physical sign given to him by God that God had rejected him. Why? Well, because somewhere the belief was in his past, somebody sinned, maybe his parents or his grandparents or his grandpappy somewhere in the past. Somebody messed up somewhere, and so God rejected him as a result of it, marked him with the handicap, so everybody does this, and pushes him to the side. So I can almost guarantee you this is a guy who has gone through his life kind of sleeking from the shadow to the shadow. He does not want to be the center of attention, because when he has been, it's not been good. It's been stares, it's been looks, it's been nasty things said about him, it's been cruel things said about him, it's been assumptions from people that didn't even take the time to get to know him. I can almost guarantee you this is not a guy that wanted, in that moment, to be stood up in the middle of everybody and pulled out from the crowd. If you're going to follow Jesus, I mean really follow him, you're going to move towards the plans he has for your life. Listen to me. It will undoubtedly involve moments throughout the course of your life where he will call you to stand up and stand out from the crowd that is around you. Now, before some of you think that I am overreaching and overreading into a very obscure detail of this passage, let me assure you, all throughout the Bible we see this. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, there is no end to the amount of times that God says to his people, to those who are to walk with him, to come out, step out, stand up, be apart, be separated from. Like, this is just part of the nature of what God seems to do. If you're going to follow me, he says, then you have to stand up and step out. Let me give you a couple verses just to make sure that you know that I'm not overreaching in this text. Can we put Psalms up on the screen? Know that the Lord has, say it for me, his faithful servant for himself. Or how about this one in Deuteronomy? It says this. You have been, say it, as holy to the Lord your God. And then one more out of 2 Corinthians. Therefore, say it, come out from them and be, says the Lord. There's examples like this all throughout the Bible where God says, you're going to follow me, I'm going to have you stand up. You're going to follow me, you're going to walk out. You're going to follow me, I'm going to separate you. That there are these moments where he seems to do with us what he did with this guy, where he'll stand you up in front of the crowd around you. And those at times are painfully difficult moments. Listen, that's why I said, if you're going to follow Jesus, then part of what you have to be willing to embody is the ability to dig down deep and find courage. Because listen, you can apply everything we've talked about throughout this series. Right? You can go back to week 1. You can be committed to want to live your life to be rich towards eternity and towards God, and not rich towards this world. Week 2, you can surround yourself with a circle of influence that's going to pull you towards Jesus. And then last week, you can be willing to do what we talked about, where you will burn parts of your past so that you can step into the future God has for you and take hold of it. But listen to me, If you don't have courage, you won't take that step. You won't take that step. And I'm tired of the ways that both inside myself and inside Christendom, we just over-spiritualize these moments. We're waiting on God to give a clear sign, you know what I should do and how I should live and who I should be. And God's going, I've made it clear. It's right in front of you. You know who I want you to be. You know what I want you to do. Just dig deep and get brave and step. And I think the reality is that whenever you're willing to do that, it's going to be so difficult because you're going to face at least 3 different sources of opposition. And it's always going to begin with yourself. Your own insecurity, your own self-doubt, your own down-talk, maybe even your own self-loathing. Right? So put yourself in this guy's shoes for a minute. Here he is, he's sitting down, clearly, because Jesus tells him to stand up. So he's sitting down somewhere, he's just doing his thing. Jesus, remember, he's got a reputation that precedes him. So he's well aware, probably, of the fact that Jesus has been rumored to heal people. Maybe it's more than a rumor to him. Maybe he actually believes this can happen. So here comes Jesus, and he approaches him. The text says that the Pharisees watched him intently so that they could accuse him, which means if they're watching him intently, there's a conversation going on. This wasn't just a random, hey, you stand up. There was a dialogue that Jesus and this guy must have been having, and it just makes me wonder that in this place, in this dialogue, before he has him stand up, if this guy wasn't just hoping that Jesus would do what Jesus can do, which is, hey, just heal me, make things better, a quiet, private little moment, personal moment between you and me, just make what's not right in my life, make it better. And I would assume that because that's what we do. I see us do that in Christendom all the time. We want this thing between us and God just to be between us and God. Just make it a private thing. It's a personal thing. It's between me and God. And then so often it's to the end of just make my life better. Whatever's not right about my life, could you fix that? My marriage is struggling. Could you fix that? Just make that better. My kids, make that better. My job, make that better. If you just between you and me, just make things better. That'd be great. Here's what Erwin McManus says in his book on your screens. I love this quote. Jesus did not come to simply make your life better. He came to turn it upside down. And when he begins to turn your life upside down, it will inevitably involve moments where you have to have courage to step towards what he has. Listen to me. If you are living your life for Jesus right now and it is not requiring moments where you have to embody significant courage, might I just suggest that maybe you believe in him but you're not following him. You cannot follow the living God of creation and not have moments where it scares you to death and you don't know if you can do it. Where you don't know if you can do what he's asking you to do. Make the decision he's asking you to make. Step in the direction he's asking you to step. If you're following him and it doesn't require courage, you might believe in him, but you may not be following him. See, I love how when I take this stage, people assume that this is natural and easy for me. Because this is what I do every week. Oh, it's just natural, it's just easy. He doesn't have a problem talking in front of people. I could never do that. Listen, this is not natural and easy for me and my personality. Not for the kid who in high school was told he had dyslexia. And it made sense all of a sudden why I struggled so often to read certain things and words just didn't make sense and whole sentences got mixed up. Do you know that all throughout high school, one of my greatest fears, I literally feel the chills right now thinking about it, was whenever I was asked to read in front of people out loud, I was terrified because I couldn't do it without messing stuff up. Words wouldn't make sense and sentences would get jumbled up. How crazy is it that kid, God says, guess what you're going to do for your life? You're going to stand on stage in front of people and you're going to read out of the book I wrote. Which is why so often, even when I read it and I mess up in front of you, I literally have moments where I have to embody courage right here on this stage. So I'm I'm an idiot. And I'm no, I'm doing what God called me to do. This isn't natural for me, for a kid who spent most of his life incredibly shy, reserved, and just introverted. And even now I still am. I say this all the time, take me off the stage, and I'm socially awkward, and I don't know how to make friends, and half of my friends are because my wife is social, and that's just my personality. Listen, if I was doing this out of my own strength, I would be in the back row, not on the stage. I'm telling you, the first time I ever spoke in public, I ran to the bathroom minutes before I got on the stage, and I think I threw up 2 weeks worth of stomach content. People even ask me now, they're like, do you ever get nervous anymore? Anymore? Today? There's not a Sunday I take this stage that I don't feel some nerves going on in here. And there are some Sundays, I'm going to TMI for a moment, there are some Sundays I can't get out of the bathroom.
I'm like peeing like a racehorse. I'm just in there and it's like, God, I'm just nervous. I don't know. I just want you to hear me say every Sunday I take the stage, it's not because it's natural. It's not because it's natural to my personality or it's normal for me or it's just because I'm just good at that. Listen, I do this because I believe it's what God's asked me to do. And so every Sunday you see me up here, it is literally an example of the power of God, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be up here. And I don't do this in my own strength, and I don't do this out of my personality. I'm telling you, I wouldn't even be in the back row. You know where I'd be? Orange table. Who's at the orange tables back there? I can't see you. You're all silhouettes. Orange table, you are my people, whoever you are. Like, I'd be with the orange table people. Like, I would not be up here. Here's the only reason I'm talking about myself. I so desperately want you to believe there's a stage God's preparing for you somewhere. And it may not be a public platform, so don't get lost in the stage analogy. But I want you to believe that somewhere in your life, there is something God is preparing for you, that if you step into it right now, listen to me, you would never believe you could do that. You would never believe you would be capable of that. That somewhere I just wish you would believe something is being prepared for you, that if you will muster up the courage and step towards it, you will find yourself doing things that right now you may be thinking, I could never do that. I would never do that. And it's some of the very thing that God is preparing you for. But you got to have courage. And you've got to hear the voice of God whisper to you in the same way he did to Joshua, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Because when you start to step towards him, your voice will be one of the first and the loudest voices to say, you can't do this. He doesn't use people like you. You'll never accomplish this. Sit back down. So when your voice says, I can't, my hope is that you will hear his voice say, but I can. And when your voice says, but this may fail, hear his voice say, but I'll be with you. And when your voice says, but I'm terrified, may you hear his voice say to you, but be strong and courageous. The problem is that it's not just your voice of resistance that you're going to feel. Because whenever you start moving towards God, I said there was at least three. One is going to be your own. But inevitably there will be moments where as you step towards all that God has for you, listen to me, you're going to feel the resistance of the crowd around you as well. And I don't know what that is for you. I don't know what that step is for you. But part of what you have got to do today or this week before this morning just fades out of your memory into the blur of just another Sunday is you've got to start to ask yourself, what is the step he's asking me to take? How is he asking me to step up and to step out in a way that just seems uncomfortable? I'm not sure of. I don't think I can do that. Like maybe it's in an area of obedience in your life. Maybe it's just an area that you know is like you have let sin reign and you've not walked in righteousness with God. Maybe it's in a relationship that you know needs to be challenged or confronted, or maybe even stepped away from. Maybe it's in quitting your job to pursue a dream that God has put on your heart. Maybe it's in making a sacrifice that you have no idea yet how to make. You need to figure out what the step is that God is calling you to right now to step up and step out. And then in the moment that fear would overtake you, hear his voice speak back to you, be strong and courageous. But if it's not your voice, it's going to be someone else's. It'll be a crowd around you. Go back to the Mark text that we were in a minute ago. So here's what happens after Jesus tells this guy to stand up. And then Jesus asked them, so he turns, he's talking to the religious people, and he asks them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill it? But they remained silent. So he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. He said to the man, stretch out your hand. Then he stretched it out, and it was completely restored. So this is the moment where like you should have your fall on your knees like there's a God moment, right? This is that moment where you would expect them to go, that's not a parlor trick. What? Like this is the moment where they go, okay, there's a God. What do you want from us? But instead, look what their stubborn hearts do. The Pharisees went out and they began to plot with the Herodians how they would kill Jesus. Listen to me, there will always be a group of people willing to kill the work that God is trying to accomplish in you, around you, and in our world, because some people just will not understand the ways of God. And listen to me, if you're going to walk in his ways, they won't understand you either. And every bit as much as they hate his ways, they'll hate you. There will always be a crowd. And maybe sometimes the crowd is a literal crowd. Maybe it's people, plural. Maybe it's 1, 2, or 3. just resounding voices that have the ability to penetrate deep into your heart and create fear and discouragement. And sometimes that crowd will come from people at school. Sometimes it will come from people at work. Sometimes it will come from a group of friends. Sometimes it will come from your own family. If you and I are not aware of the fact that there will be a voice around us that will try to convince us to go back and sit down when God is saying stand up and stand out, what we will inadvertently end up doing is listening to that crowd instead of turning deaf ear to them. And as you listen to them and find yourself sitting back down, you will push Jesus away. And all that it is that he's trying to pull you towards. Let me give you another story that has always spoke to me on this very principle here. Again, it's out of another gospel account. We're going to put it up on the screen if you don't have your Bible with you or on you. But it's out of the 8th chapter of the book of Luke. And this is the story that we read. When Jesus had stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but he had lived in the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man, and many times it had seized him. And though he was chained hand and foot and under guard, he had broken his chains and been driven by the demon into solitary places. And then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and the demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them that permission. And when the demons came out of the man and went into the pigs, the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake, and they were drowned. And when those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off, and they reported this to the town and the countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man became cured. And then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got in his boat and he left. So listen, there's a lot of stuff going on in those verses that could distract our minds from where we need to go, like demon-possessed man. Some of you are like, "Woo!" Like, all right, now you're like, demons and people? Okay, hold that for a moment. There's a whole other sermon for another day, but that's happening in that moment. And then there's the pig guy. Like, anybody ever think of the pig guy? The poor pig farmer who's just taking care of his pigs, and all of a sudden he loses his entire stock? He's like, what? Like, okay, so push all those details aside. How about this? The town freaks out at who? Jesus. They're terrified of Jesus. Not the crazy, naked, chain-breaking, graveyard camping demon dude. That doesn't freak them out. They're like, we know him. He's fine. He's been around. That's Bill. But this Jesus guy, what's his deal? Like, listen, this is what we could do. We get in places in life where we understand how life goes, even though it's not good, even though it's kind of messy. We're like, well, I get this. And then Jesus shows up and he's like, here's what I've got in store. And we freak out. And then people freak out around us. And it just blows my mind that it's Jesus that freaks them out. It's his ways that make them concerned. And in their fear, what do they request? Leave. Leave. And there are moments, and sometimes I've read this in the past, and I literally get weepy because it hits me. That what's worse than the fact that they ask him to leave is that he obliges and he goes. Do you realize that sometimes when you are walking in step with God and he is doing some of his most powerful work in you and attempting to do through you, it will create the loudest criticism around you of people that just don't understand him. So they won't understand you and the decisions you're making and what you're doing. That's why if you're going to live this kind of life and fully step into what God has in store for you, you've got to be willing not just to let him push you to places beyond what you ever thought possible for yourself. You've got to be ready to turn a deaf ear to all the criticism of the people around you. It doesn't matter who they are, how close to you they are, or how much you've previously valued their opinion. If God says move, may no human being say different to cause you to do different. Stay up, move out, stay up, move out. When God says move, you move. Listen, if your life makes sense to the people around you that aren't following Jesus, there's something wrong with that. Your life as a follower of Jesus, your values, your priorities, your principles, how you treat people, how you treat money, how you treat yourself, like nothing about how you live should make sense. If you're a follower of Jesus and nobody would bat an eye at you outside of following Jesus. You'd be like, that's just so-and-so. He's just living like everybody else. There's a problem. Again, maybe you believe in him, but I would just question you, are you following him? Are you really following him? Because I'm telling you, when you start to, the crowd will get louder and louder, and you've got to be willing to stand your ground against their criticism and against their voice that would set you back down. And some of you are like, oh man, I stand my ground all the time. Dude, you should see my Facebook. Oh man, I post after post after post. I tell the whole world what I believe, shoving it in their face. It's not really what we're talking about. Actually, you're just obnoxious. Listen, do you know why? Do you know why the people didn't answer Jesus? The Pharisees go back to the shriveled hand guy when he says to them, hey, what's better, guys? Let's get real. You don't heal on the Sabbath. Okay, is it better to do good or evil even though it's on the Sabbath and it's going to be work? And they didn't say anything. Do you know why they didn't say anything? Because all they knew were the rules. All they knew was how to tell everybody what they believed, and they were brave. I mean, they were. These were courageous men when it came to posting what they believed about the life of God. You know where they failed to have courage? Living out the life of God. They had no courage to actually live out the life of God, but they loved to tell everybody what they believed. So you're going to face resistance from yourself. You're going to face resistance from people around you. I just wish that was it. Because the last one is one of the more subtle, and I think one of the more powerful ways that we will face resistance. And it's from the dark forces that are set against us. The Apostle Paul, that began this whole series for us in Ephesians, says this also in the same book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power, and put on the full armor of God so that you can take a stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Can you hear me say that again? It's not against flesh and blood. Say that with me. It's not against flesh and blood. Listen to me. Your spouse is not your struggle. Your kid is not your struggle. Your neighbor is not your struggle. Your boss is not the struggle. North Korea is not the struggle. Terrorists are not the struggle. We love to make flesh and blood the struggle. Here's the struggle. Our struggle is against the rulers and against the authorities and against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So Paul says, so here's what we're going to do. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand firm then. You think Paul wants us to stand? He's like, here's what I want you to do. You're going to suit up, and then you're going to stand. And then once you've stood, you're going to stand. And then once you've stood so that you can stand, you're going to stand firm. But it's a little different. It's not the same kind of stand that we're talking about where you're going to stand up as God calls you up. There's a certain assumption here that you're already standing up to do what God wants because he says that's when the attack will come against you. And when it does, this is the kind of stand where he says, dig in your heels. Don't move because the enemy will press against you. And in that moment, don't back down. Listen to me. There is a very real force in the supernatural realm that we don't see, but just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not real. It does mean it's far more powerful and dangerous. Because he will use the voice of others. He will use your own voice. And then he'll just use all kinds of stuff that seems so random. So in the moments in life when you're trying to pursue what God has for you and struggle comes out of nowhere, loss comes out of nowhere. Illness comes out of nowhere. Relational breakdown comes out of nowhere. Barriers come out of nowhere. Remember that it just may be that it's not coming out of nowhere, but the unseen somewhere, where the enemy is at work against you. And so Paul would say, stand. And he says, when you stand, suit up in the armor of God. And as you read through the rest of the chapter, the armor of God is largely about walking in alignment with God, with his will, with his character, with the person of Jesus. How Jesus lived, do that. How he treated people, do that. How he treated himself, do that. Paul says you walk like that. It doesn't, here's we got to be careful. It doesn't do the old mindset of now you're in God's will, so it's safe. No. If it was safe, he wouldn't say stand your ground. You're standing your ground because the enemy will move against you. It reminds me of a scene out of Braveheart. I want to show you in just a second. But I also want to admit, listen, I know, like, no churches anymore use Braveheart. I think there was actually a secret council years ago where they decided no church could use Braveheart anymore because it was well overdone. So I'm going to break that council and maybe lose my pastor license. But this is my favorite scene out of the whole movie because it's a moment where they're about to fight the English, and the English are charging in on them on horseback, and they're just standing on the ground. And so Wallace has to challenge them all not to run in the face of overwhelming attack. And I want you to get a sense of this because I feel this in Paul's words when he says, stand, stand, stand. Check it out. Some of you got really nervous, so we're going to show it all. You're like, oh, you feel that though. I mean, I feel that energy in Paul's words when he says stand. It's a hold, because there is a force against us. And I just think sometimes if we could rip back the veils of this world, is that we would see nothing less than an army charging against us. And so often I think the reason that army is successful over us is for no other reason than the fact that we don't believe that it's there, or we misinterpret the move of the enemy against us to be something else. Well, it's just a relational thing, or it's just my boss is a moron, or it's just this, or it's just that. And we don't realize the foul fingers of the enemy. It's sticking his hands into our business in an attempt to move against us, and then we let those moments discourage us. I told you I was going to preach myself hoarse today. And here's the thing. Maybe there are churches out there that are just packed with people that are the William Wallaces of the world. They're just naturally brave and strong, and they'll take on the world. They love the spotlight. They're not intimidated by anything. Maybe there's churches like that. But is anybody surprised when a church like that does great things? And frankly, a church full of people like that could do great things out of their own personality and not even be for God or out of God's strength, because it's just who they are. But here's what's powerful, is that I love that we're at a church right now where I think most of us don't necessarily fit that bill. Not that we're all cowards, I'm just saying I think by and large, most of us are the type of people, we're not fighting to be in the spotlight. We're not fighting for upfront attention. You know, we're not fighting to be out in the front and have to be in charge of this or that. Like a lot of us are just kind of like maybe that guy. I just want to kind of get through life, and I just want it to be good. How much more powerful is it to be a church of people like that, who will muster up the courage to step forward as God calls them to and do things that we would have never, ever done in our own strength when God says move. Listen to me, God will call you to move. Will you have the courage when He does? I want to be a church like that. A church that does things we could have never imagined ourselves doing when God says to us, move, move, move. I have plans for you, but I can't. Yes, you can. But it'll fail. I'll be with you. It may not work. Be strong and courageous. So my question to you, Paradox Church, will you be the people who will stand? Will you stand? Will you stand? Will you be the people of God, determined to stand up and out from the crowd to move towards all God calls you to? So here's what I want to do. I want to end how we began. These are the words of Paul. This is why it is said, wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but wise, making the most of every opportunity, because these days are evil. May we be people who stand. Awesome. Hey, just one announcement I want to make to you. So this next week, on Saturday, we have our Big Buck Dinner, and we are flying a guy in from Idaho who is a dear friend of mine named Justin. And what's that? Dear friend. Yeah, you saw what I did. So here's the thing I just want to tell you about Justin, because you got to be here next week. You're like, I'm not going to the Buck Dinner. I know, we figure we're flying him in. We're going to get our bang out of him. He's going to speak on Sunday too. You got to be here, and you got to bring a friend. Because you know how there's certain Christians in life that are just religious people sometimes. They have a tendency that when you look at their life or just the way they treat you, you kind of always feel like you're just not doing it good enough, you know? Like, I guess I could be a better Christian. I'm just not. And then there's other people, and this is Justin, that every time I'm around him, this brother just inspires me. just to be a better man, to be a better husband, to be a better follower, to know this book better. Like, this guy is he's just incredible. And here's what's so cool. He's only been walking with Jesus for about 6 or 7 years. And he came to faith a couple years ago. And the result of that is that he gave up a very lucrative life that he was living, a business he had built for himself, and decided to follow the Lord into the ministry. And he is now only 6 years into following Jesus. He's pastoring a church in Idaho, still keeps his passion alive for hunting by being a big game guide and hunt. But he's going to come here next week and just share his story of what it means for him, a guy who had really in so many ways everything that this life says that's what you need. And he had it, but he didn't have Jesus, and none of it meant anything to him. And then he met Jesus, and much like what the Apostle Paul once said, I consider it all rubbish compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ. So next week, you don't want to miss him. He's going to be here Saturday. He's going to be here Sunday. So you be here and bring a friend. And I think it's going to be a real good experience for all of us and a treat. So you are so loved and cared about, but I want to make sure that you this morning let all of our teens throughout this building know that they are. So make sure to high five them as you leave. Make sure to thank them on your way out the doors. Paradox, we'll see you next Sunday.